nadam se da oni koji niste uspjeli sve uhvatiti, imate u naravno novom izdanju Ekonomista koje ćete dobiti na izlazu. Prije svih ostalih možete slobodno kad se šećete po gradu pod ruku i nek svi vidi da ste i bili ovdje. Došlo je vrijeme i za naš prvi panel koji smo nazvali Vrli, novi svijet. Nije Huxley, ne bojte se. Planet pred izazovima od 2020. Pogledajmo prvo filmski uvod.
With the coming of the Second World War, many eyes in imprisoned Europe turned hopefully or desperately toward the freedom of the Americas. Lisbon became the great embarkation point, but not everybody could get to Lisbon directly, and so a tortuous roundabout refugee trail sprang up. Paris to Marseille, across the Mediterranean to Oran, then by train or auto or foot across the rim of Africa to Casablanca in French Morocco. Here the fortunate ones, through money or influence or luck, might obtain exit visas and scurry to Lisbon, and from Lisbon to the New World. But the others wait in Casablanca, and wait, and wait, and wait.
Evo, za milenijalse i oni koji su malo mlađi, ovo vam je bila početna scena iz filma Casablanca prije 78 godina, kada je film sniman. Izbjeglice iz Europe prelazile su Mediteran i preko Orana i francuskog Maroka stizale u Casablanku, odakle su tražile put u novi svijet. Danas neke druge izbjeglice prelaze isti taj Mediteran, samo u drugom smjeru. Čini se da je puno izazova pred nama, Europom, regijom i Hrvatskom u godinama koje dolaze. Kako ih točno prepoznati, riješiti i koje su nam sve mogućnosti realne? Sa svojim gostima razgovara kolega Danko Družijanić, a sugovornici će mu biti gospodin Gordan Markotić, Ministarstvo vanjskih poslova i europskih integracija, zadužen za predsjedavanje Hrvatske vijećem Europe. Njegova ekscelencija, gospodin William Robert Kohorst, veleposlanik Sjedinjenih Država u Hrvatskoj. Njegova ekscelencija, gospodin Alosno Dezcalar, predsjednik Španjolske u Hrvatskoj. Njegova ekscelencija Ilan Mor, veleposlanik Izraela u Republici Hrvatskoj. I najbolji uvijek dolazi na kraju, njezina ekscelencija Helen Madunic, veleposlanica Švedske u Hrvatskoj. Dakle, panel će biti na engleskom jeziku, stoga bi sve one koji trebaju uputio da imaju uređaj za prevođenje na dnu dvorane. Ili se hoćete praviti da znate engleski, može i tako. Predajem riječ gospodinu Danku Družijaniću.
Thank you, Mr. Cardon, and thank you all for coming to this discussion. Thank you also the audience. We also wait for the end of the panel to ask for some questions from the audience. But let's start. Your Excellency, Mr. Dezcalar, we saw some numbers. No matter what they said a couple of minutes ago, I guess a lot of people will agree with me that 2019 was a turbulent year. We saw political uprisings, we saw trade wars, territorial disputes, old and new, some new ones. Also, of course, ongoing Middle East conflicts, plural. Migrants are still looking to go from the south of our planet to the north. Do you see this going on into 2020 as well?
Dobar dan. First of all, thank you very much for inviting me to this panel. I would like to say some comments before answering your question. I think we live in a world in transition. I think we can remember Antonio Gramsci's words describing this period as interregnum. Interregnum means a period where an old model is dying and the new one is not still performing. We live in an uncertain, complex, and very interdependent world where there are new players and not only states. I made, for example, mention the American company Walmart, which, if it were at a state, it would be the 10th economy in the world. And there are other actors, there are other important elements that are new to our world, like media, social media. Sovereignty nowadays is less important and less strong than it used to be. There is disinformation, manipulation, fake news. And this leads us to this current affair of the world. The world order, institutions, values, law, international law have been or are being put into question. Middle classes are in crisis. International principles and national principles and values are into question. Mr. Johnson has just spoken about the crisis in the Western liberal model. And I think this affects at two levels. At international level, we have passed from a bipolar world into now a multipolar world. I have mentioned the appearance of new actors, new players, and not only states. In 1992, the G6 supposed 68% of the world economy. Now it represents 54%. The G20 represents 85%. Multilateralism is into question. International law now is weaker than it used to be. Institutions based on principles, rules, should be reformed, but not abandoned, because there are new players who had put into question those who were created after the Second World War. Some people speak about a possible new Cold War, and not only a military Cold War, but technological trade Cold War. There are risks of use of all political options to reach one's goals, because the system and the rules are not so performant as they used to be. Technology, economy, trade, extraterritorial sanctions are more and more used. And the consequence is that when we should work closer through multilateral ways to face transnational threats, we see that unilateral measures, unilateral decisions are taken more and more often. At the national level, I've mentioned the crisis of the middle class. There is an increase of inequality, not only at international level, but at national levels. Thus, that provokes social unrest, frustration, political unrest, and that means instability. This has come from globalization. Globalization, we may ask, has gone too far. Many people ask that. This comes too from the fourth technological revolution, fear for what's going to happen in the future. Many people are going to lose their jobs, and we have to adapt. The economic and financial crisis that struck us, and we have not yet got out from it completely, that has implied a diminution of jobs, a loss of standard of living, and uncertainty for many people. So this has led to put into question governance as we used to know it. I'm speaking mainly on Western countries. Traditional parties has not been able to adapt to the demands of what people were asking for, and the social contract where our societies were based upon now is being put into question. That has led to frustration, great frustration, and the frustration leads to fear, and to fear we can remember this work written in the 30s by Erich Fromm, Fear of Freedom. Fear of freedom, fear of what is going to come in the future, may explain this rise of nationalism, populism, protectionism, this the appearance of new parties, some of them openly anti-state, anti-system. And besides of that, we are seeing how our values and principles and values of our Western liberal model are being put into question. Democracy, rule of law, freedom of speech, respect for others, which we consider as untouchable, and which are the pillars of not only our societies, of the European Union specifically, are now being put into question by new parties who are defending dictators sometimes, authoritarian ways of government, and put into question the traditional way of dealing in our Western countries with the problems. Social media, Mr. Johnson has also spoken about that. The press nowadays is being put into question too. People tend to believe what they read in social medias without confronting or verifying if it is true or not. Fake news, disinformation, misinformation, manipulation are making people sometimes voting for something which we may consider completely absurd, but what it is. And coming back to Gramsci, I think that what we need is to come back to try to reach, through multilateral ways, solutions to our transnational threats. And just coming to your question, to just cite it, because I know I'm perhaps overpassing the time I was given. There are many, I think, the challenges that we are facing now are going, unfortunately, continue to be there. And among them, I will just cite regional conflicts all over the planet, trade wars, a slowed down economy, migration crisis, security problems, terrorism, cybersecurity, nuclearization, increase in nuclear powers in the world, and the reduction of controls over nuclear arms. Climate change. Nowadays in Madrid, we are holding the COP25 meeting, which is, I think, one of the most serious threats that we are really facing in the near future. Inequality in the planet. 2030 Sustainable Development Goals are going to be taken into account. And in Europe, I think we will be able to speak about concrete European threats later. Thank you.
Of course. Thank you. Your Excellency, Ambassador Kohorst, there are some real concerns that we just heard not only from Ambassador Dezcalar, but also from the previous speakers, from Mr. Johnson, Prime Minister Plenković as well. And you know, everybody's looking for some outlook from State Department, but we are now asking for your own. Do you see all of this, all of those challenges going on in 2020, or there are some new in the horizon for U.S. government and other world leaders?
Well, I think there are a lot of challenges in the world, and a lot of the issues, it feels like we're in the middle of coming to the solution. And that will be the trade negotiations with the EU, the trade negotiations with China, what are we doing with Iran, what's happening in Syria. Everything seems to be in flux. But I would suggest that the U.S. is making real efforts to try and solve the problems, trying to reach agreements with our partners and our friends or even people who are opponents around the world. And I'm encouraged by the fact that there's dialogue occurring, and that gives you a chance for success. A year from now, we'll find out where that all ends up. But at the moment, it does feel like there's dialogue going along on many issues, which can lead to resolution, although it goes up and down. These are extraordinarily difficult issues. And then we layer on top of that the political uncertainty of the U.S. elections, governments in Israel are uncertain, governments in Spain, the Brexit, the governments. So without clear mandates from the governments, it's hard for them to negotiate. So I see 2020 as an opportunity for us to solve some of the issues around the world. We're not going to solve all of them, but I'm hopeful that a few of them that we can reach consensus, especially areas where we fundamentally agree. I think it's a shame that the U.S. and the EU are portrayed as being completely at odds. We have fundamentally the same values. We believe in peace and freedom and economic security, climate change. There's no country in the world that has done more to reduce climate emissions in the last 3 years than the United States. It's not about the Paris Accords, it's about what you do. We just don't happen to like that particular agreement. But there are lots of areas where we agree with the EU, and I believe that we'll reach resolutions.
Thank you. Your Excellency, Ambassador Mor, would you agree that we live in an unstable period or maybe in a period of accelerated changes? And how this influence your region, not only your country, but we know that this region in this part of the world is probably the most volatile, if we can say that, all over the world.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me. You know, there is a Chinese curse which says, you may live in interesting time. Show me in the history a time which hasn't been interesting. I think we are living now in a very interesting time. When you define interesting, you have, of course, to define challenges and opportunities. And someone who is coming from the Holy Land, the land of the prophets, I will never take a chance to prophesize. But I would like to speak with you or to portray from the point of view of Israel, a small country in the Middle East surrounded by enemies which are challenging its basic existence on a daily basis, three of my personal projection for the coming years. I don't believe that in 2020 we are going to solve them. It's like Churchill, whom we saw today. It's not the end of the beginning. It's not the beginning of the end. We are in the middle of those many challenges which have been mentioned here by the Prime Minister, by Mr. Johnson, by my colleagues here. So 3 elements, maybe 4 elements, which are important to Israel are the following. Climate change. You will be surprised that this issue, as much as we tend to push it on a side, is quite interesting for Israel. And I think that we in Israel and everywhere, we have to newly define our relations with the climate, because long term, I believe that mankind is going to lose if this new definition or redefinition of our relations with the climate, with our environment, are not being done. And I'm not talking about tomorrow, I'm not talking about today, I'm talking about yesterday. This is one element. The element number 2, which I think is very much of interest to the scientists in Israel and also to the Israelis, is the future life in a period of confusion. And I'm talking about generally about this technological development. I'm talking about cyber and AI, artificial intelligence. I'm talking about the questions how to live in a country and a state in which there is no privacy, cyber and cybersecurity on one hand, and on the other hand, internet, We are losing our privacy, ladies and gentlemen, and what does it mean for democracy to live, for us as individuals to live in this kind of society? I'm talking about artificial intelligence. It was mentioned, but we cannot stress it enough. Millions of people are going to lose their jobs because of artificial intelligence. Are we going to see a digital dictatorship because of artificial intelligence? And so on and so on. So the question is, how are we going to live in a time of confusion? Coming back from 10,000 feet above the earth, coming back to our region, I think one of the most challenging danger to the state of Israel is, as I mentioned it, and I would like to stress it again, those countries which are challenging the basic existence of my country, which are trying to arm themselves with nuclear weapon, not only nuclear weapon, but its delivery system, and I'm talking about long-range missiles. Another challenge is subversion activities of a certain country in the Middle East against its own neighbors and against Israel via proxies, terror organization, or as we call it, non-state actors. This is a kind of academic word for terrorism and terrorists. So in spite of the fact that we have to think long-term, what is going to be in the 21st century, and I can recommend you to read the book by Yuval Noah Harari, 21 Thoughts about the 21st Century. I hope it has been translated into Croatian, for English definitely. You will find there some ideas which I talked about, but he develops. But coming back to the daily life activities and reality in the Middle East, the biggest challenge for us is to survive in a very volatile and unstable region, which is being threatened by one country. And I think the ambassador of Spain was talking about multilateralism as a solution to all those kind of questions. I do believe that a united front against one country, which is a danger to the region, to the State of Israel, and also to Europe and the United States, if we create a united front against this country, and also in the other issues which I mentioned, I think that we can start to solve the problems which I think we are going to have in the 21st century.
Thank you very much. Your Excellency, Ambassador Madunic, we just heard about climate, issues of climate change. We heard that even from the Prime Minister Plenković. And we heard a lot about multilateralism and protecting democracy. Your country, Sweden, is well known for taking those issues really seriously. Is that your take going into 2020 as well? That we have to protect the democracy, that it's not taken for, should not be taken for granted, and also that we really need to deal with climate change?
Yes. Yes, first of all, thank you so much for inviting me. I'm honored to be in this panel. I will start by saying that I can basically subscribe to everything that has been said by previous speakers. I like the very interesting expose by my Spanish colleague. I can subscribe to all of that. But you're right, in my country, of course, we also agreed. We are looking now at the multipolar world with a lot of challenges. I mean, the list of challenges is extremely long. And we, as a rather small country, of course, we realize and we know that, I mean, we can just make as much as difference as we can, being a small country. So from our perspective, you're right, we are focusing mainly on two aspects that I would like to highlight. I mean, we have all seen and followed this young girl of Greta, how she has been inspiring a whole generation throughout the world, including here in Croatia. And of course, it has been extremely both interesting and encouraging, I would say, to see that the younger generation has taken this question of climate change so seriously. So, of course, from my government's perspective, we were in 2015 extremely satisfied and encouraged by the fact that world leaders could adopt the Agenda 2030 with the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. We see this as really an agenda for change all over the world. So our government, we are, in my country, is in the middle of a transition to a sustainable development in all different areas, not only the government, the regional, the local authorities, the NGOs, the unions, the universities. Everybody's engaged, including Greta, I would say. And I, in this context, would like to highlight the extremely important actor of the business community. Sustainable business, or CSR, whatever you prefer to call it, it's really the key, I think, to this transformation, transition. And what it is all about, I think, that we all know that we need housing, we need transports, we need clothes, we need energy. But the big challenge now for the companies is to provide all those things that we need, but in a sustainable manner. Biofuels, for instance, recycling. Instead of having a linear economy, we have to look into possibilities of having a circular economy. Nowadays, we are recycling glass, for instance, paper, but the Swedish companies are looking into the possibilities, for instance, to recycle the textiles that we are all wearing, which is extremely important development that is going on. So, first of all, we are looking into trying to find a way forward through this kind of circular and economy and sustainable development. The other aspect I would like to highlight is, as you mentioned and as has been mentioned, the challenges to the liberal democracies in the world. We never ever, I think, thought back in the 90s that we would have to be faced with a situation where the liberal democracies were being challenged and questioned. I mean, and we have, as Mr. Johnson was saying, we have actually looked into the research in this field, and what we can see is that we had an increase of liberal democracies in the world between 89, the fall of the Berlin Wall, and then until 2005. But unfortunately, we now clearly see a trend, a change, where the number of liberal democracies are going down, and at the same time we see authoritarian governments and countries increasing. And I would like to say what we also see is that there is a lot of focus on the elections. Everybody realized that you have to make sure that the elections looks or appears to be fair and free. And a lot of leaders in the world make sure of that. But what we worry about and what we can see is everything that is going on in between these elections. Squeezing of civil society, free media, this fact and figures and so on, fake news that is spreading and so on. So from our perspective, we have launched a drive for democracy. We really think that we need to join forces with other countries, not only Sweden, in particular with the EU, with the UN, to defend the liberal democracies as the main and most important way of governing countries also for the future. Because for sure this has been challenged, not only outside of EU, but actually also within the EU. So we really have a big job there to move forward in trying to defend that for the future.
Yeah, obviously. Thank you. So, Ambassador Markotić, listening to all of this, and a couple of weeks from now, Croatia will preside over EU Council. It's really a big role for a small country and the youngest member of the Union. Tell us a little bit more about goals and the visions of Croatian presidency for the 6 months period.
Actually, we are only 15 working days from the presidency, so we are counting. Well, you know, if anybody have told you 30 years ago that one day we would presiding over European Union, nobody would believe that. And only 6.5 years after our membership to the EU, we are starting our presidency. We are the last who presides for the first time. After us, the process will be déjà vu. But we are still in the process that we are preparing actually the presidency. We will deal with very important issues. First, we have a new commission. We have a new parliament. We have a question of Brexit. We will probably have to deal with that because, as you know, the deadline is 31st of January. We have multi-annual financial framework. This is a budget of the European Union. Without that, the European Union could not function. So we will have just that very, I mentioned just two of the most important topics which we will have to deal with. Apart from that, we have our own priorities, Europe that is developing, Europe that connects, Europe that protects, and Europe that is assertive. So as a small country, as a country with not very large administration, that is a quite big challenge before us, but we hope that we will solve all that problems not only from political point of view, but also from organizational and logistical point of view, that after our presidency, actually, we would be like accepted as a more mature member to the EU, which actually is somehow the aim of presiding over the Council of the European Union.
Thank you. Tell us a little bit more about the enlargement, or actually something that is going on around our eastern borders, that's Western Balkans. The enlargement is basically postponed at this point. Do you expect some kind of more turmoil on our borders because of that?
Yeah, you know that in the case of Albania and North Macedonia, that question was postponed after the last meeting of the European Council. However, our intention is to have a summit on highest level, chief of states and governments, dealing with Western Balkan. Western Balkan is normal that we are advocating this issue, and we cannot speak about Europe as a whole if we have like a black hole in the middle of Europe. So our is aim to discuss, especially with our French partners, and because after the new idea has been launched about the process of enlargement of the EU towards the Western Balkan countries, with other stakeholders in the European Union, and we hope that this summit will be functional summit, not only protocolar one, but that after this summit some things will be moved. Don't forget that this summit is the 20th anniversary of Zagreb summit, which happened actually for the first time in 2000, and that was actually for the first time some sort of opening the window opportunity for the countries in Western Balkan. So we are actually marking 20th anniversary of the Zagreb summit, and this Zagreb summit too, we hope will bring some concrete results.
Thank you. Ambassador Kohorst, do you expect something as a number one world superpower from this period, the first 6 months of 2020, because of Croatian presidency over EU? You said something already about current relationship between United States and European Union, but maybe just to reflect on this as well.
Well, from the United States perspective, we're not actively involved in the EU presidency or what's going on, but we are watching closely what's happening, and we're certainly available to consult and help as necessary. But one of the things we're really hopeful for is this is an opportunity for Croatian government to show real leadership, to show how a small country, a new member, can bring everyone together. I think Croatia's put together a very good and interesting program, a list of pillars that they want to achieve. And, I think the government's making very good progress, and I'm very hopeful that it will show that leadership and bring together a really good 6 months.
Thank you. Ambassador Dezcalar, obviously, we already heard from Mr. Johnson a lot about Brexit. In 2020, during Croatian presidency, it should be over. The saga should be over after approximately 3 years or so. How do you see relations not only between European Union and United Kingdom after that, but your country and United Kingdom?
Well, I think, to speak very clearly, I think Brexit is bad. It's bad for the European Union, and I believe it's bad for the Great Britain. They have voted for it, and we obviously respect their decision. But the consequences are going to affect all of us. And I think they are bad economically and politically. I strongly support the motto of the Croatian presidency, a stronger Europe in a world of challenges. We need in Europe to be more united. if we want to not to become irrelevant in this multipolar world that I referred first. I think that the only way for Europe to become or to stay in some way relevant is to become stronger and more united. Europe has been a success story. We have been able to create a space of prosperity, liberty, freedom, a state of real law. But it's not perfect. And I think it has come away from the real demands of citizens. And this is, I think, what the European Union must do to approach and to realize, to approach to citizens' demands and to allow the European Union to become more stronger. Brexit has given us, in some way, an opportunity. The United Kingdom was never a stronger support of the European Union politically. It saw it more like a free market or the economic aspects and not the political aspects. I think now this gives us the opportunity to work perhaps faster if we arrive to make all of us in the same line of thought, which is not easy. On the other side, another positive question is that those populist and extremist parties, which at the time of Brexit referendum defended the exit from the European Union, now are no longer defending the exit, but the transformation, the reform. I think that's a positive way. I think we have to reform the European Union, but we don't have to get rid of it. Economically, it will all depend on the deal that we reach. It will depend, I think, this fantastic exposition made by Mr. Johnson has been very clarifying. I think I couldn't add anything to what he said, just saying that, well, it all depends on who is elected in the United Kingdom and which is the deal adopted, either a hard exit or a soft exit. And all these will depend on that. Coming to Spain, for us, is very important, which the result may be, since we are a very close partner to the United Kingdom. It's the destination, if the main country where our investments are or go, we have a very important trade relation. We have 18 million of Brits who comes every year to Spain. That means 25% of the tourists that come to Spain. And we have the question of Gibraltar too. And a bad deal, some people had thought that may represent or may affect up to 1% of the Spanish GDP. The Spanish government has adopted a contingency plan, obviously, but obviously we are very concerned about which is going to happen and which is the deal which is going to be reached.
Thank you. Ambassador Madunic, in regard to Brexit, but some other processes as well, we are accustomed for decades to free global trade. Is it now challenged, or this period is just a disruption? Because obviously some things are showing us that it's going to change. There's a trade wars, there's Brexit, and so on.
Well, first of all, on Brexit, I would like to also agree with my Spanish colleague by saying that, of course, we deeply regret that the UK decided to move in this direction. At the same time, we very much respect their decision. As was also obvious from the presentation of Mr. Johnson, I think that we are facing quite a long period of talking about Brexit, unfortunately. It's not going to be the end by the end of January next year, but this is going to continue. And of course, the next step, where the Croatian presidency will have a very important role, is to define this new relationship with the UK. And those negotiations have not even started yet. From a Swedish perspective, we are very much dependent on, not least, to say the relations, economic relations with the UK. And UK is a very close partner to Sweden within the EU. So for that reason, our government's position is that we would like to see as broad and as deep relationships with the UK also in the future. And these negotiations, as I said, will start during the Croatian presidency, and we look forward to an agreement in that. And in relation to that, of course, trade, as I mentioned, is extremely important for us, I must say. We are not a very big market, 10 million people, which means Swedish companies, we have around 1.2 million companies registered in Sweden. If they want to grow, they have to very quickly move outside of the Swedish market because it's too small for them. For that reason, our whole economic development and prosperity of my country, ever since the Second World War, well, even before that, we started with the Vikings and onwards, but looking at modern history, it was after the Second World War where really trade and free trade has been extremely important for our economic development. So that I will continue. And what we think that we need is an international rule-based order related to the WTO. And why is that? Because then it makes it easy for companies to know what to expect. The predictability for companies is extremely important. And the other aspect of WTO is that all countries are being treated equally. So you know what to expect, you know what you get. And for that reason, we think it's extremely important to try to support the continuation of a well-functioning WTO also for the future.
Ambassador Mor, we already said, and you talked about it, how specific situation, geopolitical situation for your country is the juncture of civilization, so much history, Holy Land, as you said. With all of that experience, what is important for such a relatively small in number society to be, not only to be successful, but to survive in a way?
Well, I think you put your finger on two elements which are kind of basic characters of my country. On one hand, the need, a country which is forced from day one, from zero, 1948, to defend itself on a permanent basis. Lucky for us, we have peace agreements with our neighbors, but there are other neighbors which, as I said before, do not understand and are not ready to accept the fact that Israel is a fact of the Middle East, part of the Middle East. Some, even though countries which have a peace agreement with us, the people believe that we are a foreign body in the Middle East, which is totally not true, but this is not the time, not the place to go into this. So on one hand, to survive up to this very day, while reaching our hands to peace with our neighbors and also with our immediate neighbors, the Palestinians. I don't want to dwell on this now. On the other hand, we had a country, we had a state to run. We had to develop our society from zero, from 1948, 1947, which was there in Palestine at that time, was nothing. So if you really want to understand the challenges, the permanent challenges of the State of Israel, which are the reality of today, is on one hand the ability to defend itself and to survive, on the other hand to develop itself to a level in which Israel has become a role model for many countries in the world. Just an example, innovation and science and technology. On sport, we are not that good. There are many countries which are better than us, but we are very much proud of the fact that a small country like us, we are a little bit more than 9 million people, has become one of the leading countries in information technology and also in biotech. Just to mention cyber and cybersecurity, which are, we have become, as I said, a leading country. So if you take these two contradiction phenomena, on one hand survival, on the other hand developing and becoming, developing ourselves and becoming one of the leading countries of the world, you have to admit that in a way there is a miracle happening in front of our eyes. Not that we are perfect, we are far from being perfect, but if you take the starting position of the State of Israel 72 years ago and you compare it to today, I think we Israelis, at least, Israelis can be proud of ourselves. It doesn't mean that we do not think long term. And if I may, to one word about Brexit, Israel is not a member of the European Union, but I personally regret that Britain is going to leave this noble club of 550 million members. Being isolated in our area in the Middle East, down there in the Middle East, we can appreciate what does it mean to join, to become a member of this club named the European Union. The raison d'etre of establishing the European Union, no more war. Let us solve our political problems and disagreement through dialogue. I wish we could have it down there in the Middle East. I think the Brexit is a kind of reaction to the end of history in a way. Liberalism cannot tell the story of today anymore. After fascism and communism, Nazism and communism, liberalism was thought to be this story, as Francis Fukuyama said, the end of history after the downfall of communism. No, ladies and gentlemen, we are still in a way in which we are looking through new ways. Illiberal democracy in a country next to Croatia, it's only one phenomenon. It's the return to Tsarism, and in Russia, this is another sign of this confusion that we are living in. As I said before, it's not the end of the beginning, it's not even the beginning of the end. We have to learn how to live with it and to try to build up, to shape a new story. And maybe after Brexit, the European Union will come to terms with reality and will start to shape a new story. For example, a new story for NATO, raising defense budgets, looking outside the borders, not only to the east, but also down to the south, to Africa and into the Middle East. So our plate, ladies and gentlemen, is very full. I hope that there will be leaders. This is also a crisis which we have to pay attention to, the lack of leadership in the world. I hope there will be leaders coming up who will take us to create a new story which everyone can live together and to enjoy life.
Thank you. I think this is a good point to maybe see if there are some questions from the audience, because all of these issues, topics that we spoke about just pile up as very interesting for some other discussions. Yes, you can ask questions in English, please, or we have one question over there and then second question here, or in Croatian, then we'll translate, however you like it. No, the microphone is behind you. We have a microphone, sir. Sorry. Yes.
Very good afternoon.
Could you please stand up, please?
Of course. Let me introduce myself. My name is Rebecca. I'm the general manager of Zagreb Cruise Port, and I'm working with Global Ports Holdings. I do have two questions. One question is for His Excellency Kohorst, and the second one is going to be for His Excellency Dezcalar. Mr. Kohorst, would you be able to tell me in the near future, next year, perhaps a year after that, U.S. policy towards Cuba, is it going to change? Is it going to loosen up perhaps a little bit? And my question towards Mr. Dezcalar, can you make a comparison between Spanish and Croatian tourism? Do you see any similarities? What would be the point of interest for Spanish guests to come to Croatia? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Ambassador Kohorst, please.
So the question is, will U.S. policy change toward Cuba in the next year or so? And a lot of that will depend upon what happens in Venezuela. I think a lot of the current policy we have toward Cuba is really trying to affect legitimate change in the country of Venezuela. And so we reinstituted sanctions because to a great degree the Maduro regime is being upheld by Cuban imports. So we think it's just a crime that such a wealthy country as Venezuela is in its terrible shape. Thousands of people dying, millions moving out of the country, and we need to do whatever we can to facilitate legitimate change to the Guaido presidency. And we really encourage Croatia to support us in that and to encourage the European Union countries to get behind our program with Cuba, which benefits the people of Venezuela.
Thank you. Ambassador Dezcalar.
Yes, thank you. I think, well, for both of our countries, tourism is very important. For us, it's up to 10% of the GDP. For Jews, it's up to 20%. I think that's a great difference. For us, we have received last year 82 million tourists. For you, last year was 19. I wouldn't dare to give any advice, but I would what I could say is perhaps you may learn from our mistakes. Protect your landscape. Don't do what we have done in the seashore in some areas of the Mediterranean where we have destroyed the coast, the seashore. We are trying now to evolve for the last year from a typical sand and beach tourist model to other kinds of tourists, trying to attract all kinds of tourists. Gastronomy, for example, is becoming an important part of people to come to Spain. Cultural heritage, we are the third country in the world with more UNESCO cultural sites. The interior is Spain. So there are other alternatives just to sand and beach. And if this may be of useful for you, we are really ready to share that with you. In fact, I've been talking with the Minister of Tourism, and we are trying to see if we can collaborate in some ways.
Thank you, Ambassador. We have a question here, please.
Thank you very much for the very insightful panel. Climate change, non-proliferation, ocean plastics, infectious disease, cyberspace, demography, all of these challenges need global thinking. On the other hand, there has been an observation that more and more states are divided within. So what to do? For instance, Japan and EU had just enacted a partnership agreement, and in that course we are not having only more free trade and investment, but in the course of enacting that agreement, there has been lots of exchange amongst experts. Mr. Johnson mentioned about the experts' importance. So my humble answer is that the thing to counter populism is professionalism. But I wondered if any of the distinguished ambassadors would have a view on this, or the Croatian Foreign Affairs has the view on this point. Thank you.
Any suggestion who could be the one to answer?
Anyone who would have some, yes.
So,
thank you.
if anyone wants to reflect on that, I don't know.
Elon, you've never been short of a desire to speak. Go ahead. Speak.
So,
Well, I'm not sure I understood the question.
it was more an answer.
Yeah, I continue with my line. I think we cannot make decisions right now because we are in the middle of the eye of the storm. There is a lot of confusion in the world coming from the United States over Europe, China, the Middle East. I think we need to work together, multilateralism, to solve the problems, which down the road, if we don't deal with them, we are going to pay a heavy price. So my answer is a combination of both, politicians and experts. But the main idea is we have to join forces. We have to make sure that this new era in the 21st century, which to my opinion will be controlled by artificial intelligence, cyber, biotech, and IT, this is the most important challenges. And if governments, politicians will not put them on the agenda, experts will not help.
Sure. We have time for one more question. Sir, over there you had a question. Jeste vi imali pitanje, gospodine? Ustali ste se? No. Bili ste se ustali? Dobro. Evo imamo ovdje. Ajde, molim vas samo kratko. Please, just short one.
Canada to Croatia. I just wanted to make a quick comment. One of the solutions in Canada that we're promoting to deal with many of the challenges that we've discussed today is increasing the role of women in society. And I wanted to use that as an opportunity to say that I agreed with everybody, but I particularly agreed with our Swedish colleague in terms of the points that you raised today, and especially the importance of business engagement in this particular context. So thank you very much for doing this. But our solution in Canada is more women on panels, more women in government, and more women in business. But beyond that, there is such a thing as what we call the international rules-based order. And we think that in a world of change, as is the case today, and I think our Spanish colleague has articulated it most clearly at the beginning of the panel, we need to be steadfast about some key values. And for us in Canada, the rules-based international order is 5 things. It's the rule of law, it's democracy, it's human rights, it's open markets, and it's strong international institutions, such as the UN, the WTO, and the EU. So I just wanted to plug that commercial about what we think doesn't need to change and what needs to be reinforced as we tackle those challenges in 2020. And if our colleague from the Croatian Ministry of Foreign Affairs would like to comment, I would be quite keen for your perspective on, during the Croatian presidency, on 2 of those 5 elements, the rule of law and democracy. What are your intentions in terms of the Croatian presidency? That's very important to us.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. So just quick reflection on this.
Okay. First of all, the role of women. You know that apart from ministerial councils, which we are going to organize in Croatia, informals, 12 of them, we will organize 9 ministerial conferences, trying to address all the very important topics today in Europe and in the world as well. One of them will also be a conference on gender equality, where we will address different aspects of women's participation, not only in public life, but in a life as a whole, including business, including all the other things. So this is the answer to the participation of women, better participation. Speaking about democracy and rule of law, of course, that is a base also in our 4 topics. Europe that grows. Europe that grows cannot grow without rule of law, without democratization. You know that Croatian Commissioner and Vice President of the Commission, Madame Šuica, is in charge for the conference on democracy and demography. And that is also something which we are going to specially address during our presidency of these 6 months.
Thank you. Thank you all. I think this is a good point to wrap it all up. Your Excellencies, thank you very much. We heard a lot of interesting things, Ambassador Markotić as well. And the organizers told me that there's going to be a panel discussion next year as well, so we can proceed and save the questions for the next year. Thank you all, and we are now proceeding with my esteemed colleague, Mr. Kardum, please.
Zahvaljujem gospodinu Družijaniću. Pozdravimo još jedan put velikim pljeskom sve njegove sugovornike. Zahvaljujemo svima još jednom. Slijedi ono što se zove family photo. Nasmiješite se i pogledajte u daljinu. Evo, na ovakvoj fotografiji bi pozavidio i Benetton. Zahvaljujemo svim veleposlanicima koji su našli vremena, volje i želje da sudjeluju u ovom panelu. Kako je pored politike i geopolitike jedna od ključnih tema konferencije i gospodarstvo.